Hi, welcome back. We are halfway through our workbook now, going on to the second half with lesson 14. Adverse. Adverse wind, adverse reaction. Something adverse to you is unfavorable or antagonistic. And it is related to the word from last lesson, adversary, because the roots are the same. Ad is to or towards you, and vert or verse means to turn. So something is turned towards you. In this case, it's not a person, but some condition that is against you, like the adverse wind, is the wind blowing against you. So if a plane is flying in the air and the wind is adverse to the plane or the direction of the plane, that travel would take longer. I think those are some common physics questions, like you're on a boat and the river, if you're going upstream, then the current is against you, it is adverse, so it will take longer. Compared to if you're going downstream, the water is carrying you also in the same direction, so you'll go faster. And the other definition we want to talk about is the adverse reaction of drugs. Usually, you take some drugs and there are side effects associated with the drugs, then you call them adverse reactions, some reactions that are bad for you. Blasphemy. Thou shalt not blaspheme. That phrase is one of the Ten Commandments, I believe, and it is about cursing, irreverence, and sacrilege. It means that you're not supposed to say anything that insults God. That would be considered sacrilege. Sacrilege is anything that violates the sanctity of something, the holiness of something, and to use God's name is to do that. And the verb is blaspheme, and that's what we have in the phrase. The vocab word listed is blasphemy. Now, often in our phrases, we don't use the exact same form because these are same words, just in different parts of speech, and you should be able to recognize them as the same word and distinguish them with the different spelling so you use them correctly in usage as well. So in the Jewish religion, speaking of God's name is considered blasphemy. In the Muslim religion, Islamic religion, the drawing a picture of Muhammad, their prophet, the person that they worship, that is considered a blasphemy. And so they will get very upset about any kind of drawings, like cartoon drawings of Muhammad. There was a terror incident in France a while back because a particular newspaper, I think it was France, there was a particular newspaper that printed a cartoon, and it delineated, we learned that word, right? Delineated an image of Muhammad in their cartoon. So the Muslim community was very upset, and someone went in and just went into the newspaper company and killed a lot of people because of it, because they felt that it was blasphemy against their God and their religion. So the picture image that you have here is a comedy troupe called Monty Python. Very famous. Teachers really like Monty Python, so you might have heard of it somewhere along the way. They have very funny skits. You might check it out on YouTube. This is a scene of a man getting stoned because he said, this halibut is good enough for Jehovah, is what he said. He was having dinner and he really liked the taste of the halibut. And that was considered blasphemy because he said the word Jehovah, which is a name of God. So he's being stoned. And it's a very funny bit. So you can search it for Monty Python stoning, and that will get you to this video clip. Depravity. Depravity of criminals. Depravity is the corruption, the wickedness, or any form of evil is the depravity. So anytime you think of criminals and what they do, stealing, murdering, or any kind of harm, it's all depraved behavior. So that is the adjective depraved, and we don't want to confuse that word with the word deprived, as in not having something. Deprived children are children who are not given something that they should have had, like love or Nintendo or something. If you didn't have something when you were growing up, then you were deprived of that thing. That's a different word, and it doesn't mean you're evil at all, right? Embellish. Embellish the truth, embellish the dress. To embellish is to adorn, to ornament. So it means basically to decorate something. Like a dress. The dress was embellished with lace. It was decorated with it. It was ornamented with something additional. So the other common usage is to exaggerate an idea. You would say after you lie about something, like exaggerate your past history or whatever, your resume, you might say, I didn't lie, I just embellished the truth a little bit. Okay, and that just means I was exaggerating, so I was kind of lying, but not 100%. Garrulous. Garrulous old men. The idea here is loquacious, wordy, and talkative, which just means altogether they all mean that you talk too much, basically, and you use lots of words to explain anything. So imagine someone like that, just kind of chatters on and on. Okay? Imagine people, in this case, with a garrulous old man, imagine people sitting idly and chattering all day long. So the image I have when I think of a garrulous old man is, for some reason, kind of a Western scene, and that's the image I have there for you, where the men don't have much to do, so they just kind of sit around. And in my image, I have old men sitting in their rocking chairs, whittling. Whittling is taking a piece of stick and just kind of carving it with a knife, carving it bits and pieces away. Sometimes they make a figure out of it. Sometimes they just keep carving it until the stick is gone, and that's the whole purpose, just to idly cut the pieces away. And while they do that, they're just kind of chattering on and on about all the meaningless, trivial things, and they're being very garrulous about it. Induce, sleep inducing pills. These are your sleeping pills, and what they do is they induce sleep. They persuade you. They bring about sleep. So it is sleep causing. Okay, so a sleep inducing pill causes you to sleep. The root here is deuce, which is to lead, and we see that in words like produce, introduce, reduce, etc. All these words have some kind of leading. So to induce is to lead you into something. And so a phrase or sentence we might see something like this. The advertisement is meant to induce people to eat more fruit, to cause them, to lead them into. Or no one knows what induced him to leave, what led him to, what caused him to. Her illness was induced by overwork. The overwork caused her to get sick. And so this image here is kind of funny because the sleep-inducing pill in this case is actually not just causing sleep in your stomach, it's actually persuading you by talking to you. You're getting very sleepy. So that's the joke. Now there's one more sentence. They will induce labor to avoid complications. Induced labor means when a woman is having a baby, she has to go into this stage called a labor, where she feels a lot of pain, and that's just before having the baby, having the birth. And so to induce labor, I think they would give her some medication or something that causes her to get into that labor state. That's when some women don't get into labor at the proper time. Misnomer. Indian was a misnomer. Indian, of course, was the wrong name or the incorrect designation, right? Mis is the prefix here, which means wrong, and nomer is name, and the nomer is not really important. So it is the wrong name for something. And we know the story of Columbus and how he was searching for the Indies, and or India, they say. Okay, so you get different versions of the story. India or Indies, and he went and he found the Caribbean islands, I believe, and he thought he was in the Indies, so he called these people Indians, right? And that was a misnomer. It was a name wrongly given to these people. Precocious child. Precocious child is very mature for that person's age. So if you have a 5-year-old that talks like a 10-year-old, or a 10-year-old that talks like a 20-year-old, then that's a precocious child. The pre here means before, as we've seen many times, and coquere, to cook. Interesting word combination here. So what does it mean? Well, the child is fully cooked sooner than expected, basically. So you've fully ripened before your time. You're very early in that ripening, is the idea. So when I think of a precocious child, I always think of child actors. All child actors have to be very precocious because they need to, you know, be able to handle all their lines, memorizing and the situation, dealing with the stage and cameras and so forth. And so kids like Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone were very precocious from the very young age, and that's why they were so popular. Resplendent new clothes. That is dazzling, glorious, brilliant. Think of a fancy dress, a fancy suit, something like that. That would be resplendent. It is related to the word splendid and splendor, the splendor of something, the pizzazz, right? And you say, wow, that's splendid, it's great, it's excellent. It's all similar idea. We might see sentence like this: the fields were resplendent with flowers. It was glorious. It was dazzling with flowers. She looked resplendent in her green evening gown. She looked brilliant and dazzling. A bird with resplendent yellow feathers. The feathers are very dazzling. Tantamount. Statement tantamount to a confession. This means that the statement is equivalent in effect or value. So that means you made a statement to the police, but it sounded like a confession. It was practically the same thing. And that's what this phrase is: statement tantamount to a confession. It's not a sentence. It's not saying that statement is. It's a statement tantamount to a confession. Okay? Confession like statement. Now, the photo here is of O.J. Simpson. You might not know this, but I have to explain who O.J. Simpson is because these phrases were originally formulated back in the 1990s. And so you will come across many references to O.J. Simpson and Clinton's and so on because they were the main. O.J. Simpson was a big, current event of the time. O.J. Simpson was a football star, ex-football star, and then he, did small parts in movies and such, and he was a very popular figure. Someone like, like Michael Jordan or LeBron of today's time, I guess. Very famous, well-respected. And then he was accused of murdering two people, his ex-wife and the ex-wife's boyfriend, with a knife, cutting them up and stuff. Anyway, he was arrested for that. He was charged for that, and he went to trial for it. And that trial was broadcasted on TV live every day for a whole year. And so the world's attention was on this one trial. And the biggest surprise of all was that after a whole year of trial, when 90% of Americans believed that he was guilty based on all the evidence, he was acquitted of the crime. He was found not guilty, surprisingly. And it was all about racism and such. All right, so that's the basic story. We'll see OJ's name come up many times again. In relation to this story, about 20 years later, OJ Simpson either wrote a book or planned to write a book called If I Did It. And so he was going to talk about how in this book, he was going to say, I didn't kill them, but if I did it, he was going to explain maybe how he would have done it and stuff. And so this book was like almost a confession that he actually did it, even though he's not saying he did it, but if I did it. So this is a statement tantamount to a confession. All right, sorry for the long-winded explanation, but the OJ I just want you to know for future reference. Thanks for watching. That was 14, and we'll see you again in lesson 15.